The door closing, the days moved on, but the house no longer felt like the same home. Something invisible had changed forever between father and son. They spoke, they laughed, they worked together. But behind every word lived an unspoken truth. It was not only grief that bound them now. It was something deeper, more dangerous, something neither could confess openly. The silence was alive with it, and no matter how hard they tried, they could not return to the life they had before. One evening, the sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of orange and gold. The son stood at the kitchen counter, drying dishes slowly. His father sat nearby, sipping tea, watching him with quiet eyes. The air was calm, but heavy. Finally, his father spoke. "We can't go on like this." His voice was low, steady, but filled with sorrow. The son froze, the plate still in his hand. "I know," he whispered. His father set his cup down, the small sound echoing louder than it should. "You've given me comfort when I needed it most. But if we stay here, in this place between us, it will destroy us both." The son's chest tightened. He wanted to protest, to say he didn't care, to beg for the closeness they had shared. But deep inside, he knew his father was right. What they felt, what they had touched, could never exist in the open. It would always remain in shadows, in silence. "Then what do we do?" The son asked, his voice cracking. His father looked at him, eyes full of pain, but also love. "We remember. We carry it inside. But we step back before it's too late." Tears burned in the boy's eyes. He nodded, though his heart screamed in protest. He placed the dish down and sat across from his father. For a long time, they said nothing. They only sat, staring into the silence that had always carried their secrets. Later that night, the son packed a small bag. He moved slowly, his hands heavy with every fold of clothing. His father stood at the doorway, watching quietly, his face pale in the dim light. "You're leaving?" the father asked, his voice almost a whisper. The son paused, clutching the bag. "Maybe just for a while. Maybe I need space. If I stay, we'll keep crossing lines." His father's throat worked, but no words came at first. Then, finally, he said, "I'll miss you every moment." The son looked at him, eyes glassy. "I'll miss you too." They stood there in silence, the weight of everything pressing down. The father stepped forward, as if to embrace him, but stopped. His hand hovered in the air, trembling, then dropped back to his side. The son's chest ached at the sight. Together, they walked downstairs. The house was dark, the only sound the ticking of the clock and the soft hum of the refrigerator. Each step toward the door felt like the final beat of something precious, fragile and forbidden. At the door, the son placed his bag down and turned. For a moment, he forgot everything: the rules, the shame, the world outside. He only saw his father, the man who had raised him, the man who had reached for him in grief, the man who had asked for something shocking but had also shown him a love too. Complicated to name. Their eyes locked one last time. No words were spoken, but their silence said everything. The father's lips parted slightly, as if to say goodbye, but instead, he whispered, "You'll always be here." He placed a trembling hand over his chest. The son nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. "And you'll always be here," he whispered back, placing his hand over his own heart. Then, with a deep breath, he picked up his bag and opened the door. The cool night air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain and earth. He stepped outside, turning once more to look back. His father stood in the doorway, framed by the warm light behind him, his face etched with sorrow and tenderness. For a long heartbeat, neither moved. Then, slowly, the son pulled the door shut. The soft click echoed like a final note in a song. On one side of the door, the father stood alone in the house, surrounded by silence that would never again feel the same. On the other side, the son walked into the night, carrying both the weight and the warmth of what they had shared. It was the end of something forbidden, but also the beginning of a memory that would never fade. The silence after loss had brought them together. The silence after love would follow them forever, and though no one else would ever know, the truth lived in their hearts, unspoken, unbroken, unforgettable. The unspoken confession, the days turned into weeks. And life inside the house seemed almost normal again, at least to anyone looking from the outside. The neighbors saw a father and son tending the garden together, walking to the market or sitting quietly on the porch as the sun went down. But inside the walls of that old house, silence had grown into something heavier. Something both of them carried, but neither dared to name. Each evening followed the same rhythm. Dinner, tea, soft talk about small things. Then sitting together in the living room as the lamp filled the corners with warm light. It was a rhythm of comfort, but also of tension. Every brush of fingers when passing a plate, every shared glance that lingered a moment too long, felt like sparks falling on dry wood. The son tried to ignore it. He told himself it was grief, nothing more. His father had lost his wife, and he himself had lost his mother. They were both just reaching for comfort, for closeness, for a way to survive the emptiness. But at night, when he lay awake, he couldn't deny the truth pressing against his chest. It wasn't only grief. It was something more dangerous, more complicated. Something like longing. One evening, the rain returned. It beat gently on the windows, the sound steady and calming, like the earth breathing. The son sat reading on the couch while his father rested beside him, eyes closed, listening. The book trembled slightly in the young man's hands, though he tried to stay calm. His father's shoulder brushed against his, their bodies close in the quiet room. Minutes passed before the father spoke. His voice was soft, heavy, almost breaking. "Do you ever feel," he asked, "like there are words trapped inside you? Words you can't say because the world would never understand." The son froze. His throat went dry. He shut the book slowly, his hands shaking. He knew exactly what his father meant. He had felt those same trapped words for weeks. "Yes," he whispered, barely able to breathe the word. His father turned his head slightly, looking at him with eyes full of grief and something more. "Every day," the older man said, his voice rough. "I wake up with them. I go to bed with them. I keep them locked here." He pressed a hand against his chest, "but they don't go away." The son's heart raced. He wanted to ask what those words were, but he already knew. He could see it in the way his father looked at him, in the way his hand had lingered, in the way silence felt more intimate than any touch. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to speak. "Maybe. Some words don't need to be said," he whispered, his voice trembling. His father leaned closer, his breath brushing against the boy's ear, warm and fragile. "Or maybe," he murmured, "some words need to be heard, even if they can never be spoken out loud." The son's chest ached. He felt caught between fear and desire, between what was right and what was real. His father's nearness burned through him, making it hard to think, hard to breathe. The silence that followed was thick, almost unbearable. Their eyes met, holding each other in a gaze that said everything neither dared to speak. His father reached out, slowly, carefully, and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. The touch was steady, strong, but trembling just enough to betray the storm beneath. The son didn't move away. Instead, he leaned slightly into it, his breath shallow, his heart hammering. It wasn't a confession in words, but it was a confession all the same. They sat like that for a long time, locked in silence until the rain softened and the night grew late. Finally, his father pulled his hand back, as if afraid of what might come next. He stood, clearing his throat, pretending to adjust the curtain. The son sat frozen, his skin still burning from the touch. His mind drowning in thoughts he couldn't control. When he went to bed that night, he lay awake again, staring into the dark. He replayed his father's words. Some words need to be heard, even if they can never be spoken. He realized then that the confession had already been made. Not in sentences, not in clear speech, but in looks, in touches, in silences that said more than words ever could. It was an unspoken confession, but it lived between them now, alive and undeniable. And though neither of them had crossed the final line, both knew they were standing on its very edge. The bittersweet morning came slowly, with pale light slipping through the curtains and spreading across the quiet house. The storm was gone, but its memory still lingered in the air, heavy and damp. The sun woke early, his body tired, but his mind restless. He sat at the edge of his bed, staring at the floor, replaying the night before. Every detail haunted him: the warmth of his father's hand, the brush of his thumb, the way their foreheads had pressed together in silence. His chest tightened as he thought of it. It was wrong, it was dangerous, and yet was also the first time since his mother's passing that he had felt alive. Truly alive. He went downstairs, the wooden steps creaking under his feet. In the kitchen, the smell of coffee filled the air. His father stood by the counter, holding a cup, his back turned. When he heard the footsteps, he turned slowly. Their eyes met, and for a long moment, neither spoke. "Morning," his father said softly, his voice calm but carrying something deeper, something unspoken. "Morning," the son replied, his throat dry. They sat at the table, cups between them, the quiet ticking of the clock filling the room. The world outside was ordinary: the hum of distant cars, the call of birds bud inside the house. Every sound carried weight. The son watched his father's hands around the cup. He thought of how those hands had guided him through childhood, strong and steady. Now, when they touched, they carried a different meaning, meaning that could never be explained. His father finally broke the silence. "About last night," his voice faltered. He looked down at his cup, as if the words were too heavy to face. The son's heart raced. He waited, holding his breath. "It can't happen again," his father said, though his voice trembled. "We crossed a line. It isn't what should be. People wouldn't understand." The son nodded quickly, but his chest ached. He wanted to agree, to push it all away, but instead, his voice came out weak. "I know, but I don't regret it." His father's eyes lifted to his, sharp with surprise, then soft with sorrow. "Neither do I," he whispered. The confession hung in the air, fragile and bittersweet. They sat in silence again, both knowing the truth. What had passed between them was not something they could erase. It had changed everything. The rest of the day was filled with small tasks: folding laundry, fixing the squeaky door, watering plants in the garden. They spoke little, but when they did, their voices were gentle, almost careful, as if they were protecting something delicate. At lunch, their hands brushed again when passing a bowl. This time, the touch was brief, almost nervous. Both pulled away quickly, but the memory of the night before burned between them. Later, in the afternoon light, they sat outside on the porch. The air was fresh after the storm, carrying the scent of wet earth. The father leaned back in his chair, staring out at the garden. The son sat beside him, the silence between them heavy but not empty. "You remind me of her," his father said quietly, not looking at him. "Not just in the way you move or the way you laugh, but in the way you look at me. It's the same warmth, the same care." The son swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. He felt both honored and broken by the words. "I only want to take care of you," he whispered. The father turned his head then, its eye shining with a mixture of grief and longing. For a moment, it seemed he might reach out, might take his son's hand again. But he didn't. He only sighed deeply and leaned back, closing his eyes. That evening, As the sun set, the house glowed with golden light. They prepared dinner together, side by side, shoulders brushing. They laughed softly at small mistakes, the rice boiling too fast, the sauce spilling over the edge of the pan. It felt almost normal, almost safe. But underneath the laughter was the ache of knowing they could never return to what they were before. The bond between them had changed, deepened, blurred. When the dishes were done, they sat again in the living room, the lamp glowing softly. This time there were no touches, no confessions, only silence. But it was a silence full of meaning, full of memory. As night fell, the son stood to go upstairs. His father's eyes followed him, heavy with emotion. Just before leaving the room, the son paused, turning back. Their eyes met one last time in the dim light. "Good night," the son whispered. "Good night," his father replied, his voice quiet but warm. The son went upstairs, the sound of his footsteps fading. His father sat alone, staring at the lamp. Lost in thought, it was a bittersweet morning that had stretched into a bittersweet day. They had both admitted the truth without fully speaking it. They had both felt the closeness, the desire, the longing. And though they promised it would not happen again, both knew the promise was as fragile as glass. The night would come again, and with it, silence and temptation. The shocking requests the night was quiet again. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy and cool. In the living room, the lamp cast a soft glow, wrapping the walls in gold and shadow. The son sat on the couch, a book open in his lap, though he wasn't reading. His father sat across from him, staring into his cup of tea as if the answers to his pain floated somewhere in the steam. The silence stretched between them. Not empty silence, but something thick, like the room itself was holding its breath. The son shifted, nervous, under the weight of his father's gaze. He knew something was different tonight. Finally, the father spoke. His voice was low, unsteady. "It's been hard." Without her, his words trembled, but his eyes did not. "The nights feel longer. The house feels too big." The son nodded, unsure what to say. "I know, Dad. I feel it too." His father leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped tightly together. "I don't know how to ask this," he whispered, his throat catching. He paused, and in that pause, the son's heartbeat grew louder in his ears. Then came the request. "I need you to stay close to me, not just as my son, but more. I don't want to be alone anymore." The words dropped into the room like a stone in water, rippling outward. The son froze, his breath caught in his chest. His father's eyes held his firmly, searching, pleading, yet filled with something dangerous, something forbidden. The son's lips parted, but no words came. He looked at his father, trying to understand, trying to believe he had not heard wrong. "More?" he finally whispered, his voice barely audible. His father nodded, slowly, his face pale and raw with honesty. "More, I need comfort, warmth, closeness. I can't keep going with just silence. I know it's not what should be asked, but it's what I feel. I don't want to keep pretending." The son's mind spun. His father's words were shocking, impossible, yet they echoed feelings he himself had been burying. The long looks, the lingering touches, the warmth that felt like more than grief had all been leading here. He swallowed hard, looking down at his hands, which trembled slightly on his lap. "Dad, this isn't right," he whispered, though his voice lacked conviction. His father's hand reached across the space between them, resting gently on his. The same hand that once taught him how to write, how to tie a knot, how to ride a bike. Now it carried a different meaning, a different weight. "I know," his father admitted. "But sometimes, what feels wrong is the only thing that feels alive." The son's chest tightened. His heart pounded against his ribs, each beat louder than the ticking clock on the wall. His father's hand was warm, firm, trembling just enough to betray his own fear. A silence followed. Not the silence of grief, but of choice. The kind of silence that asks a question louder than words. Finally, the son looked up. Their eyes locked again. For the first time, he saw his father not as a parent, but as a man lonely, vulnerable, desperate for love. And in that moment, he realized he was just as desperate. He wanted to pull away, to end the tension, to say no. But he didn't. He couldn't. Instead, he let the hand stay. He let his father's thumb brush over his knuckles. He let the warmth seep into him, filling the cold corners of his heart. When his father leaned closer, the son didn't move. The air grew heavy, charged, almost unbearable. Their breaths mingled, shallow and uneven. For a heartbeat, it felt like the whole world had narrowed to just the two of them, bound together by grief and something they should not name. But his father stopped before crossing that last line. His forehead pressed lightly against his son's, a gesture both intimate and safe. His voice broke into a whisper. "I don't want to lose you too. Just stay with me. That's all I ask." The son closed his eyes. His heart ached with confusion, guilt, and longing all at once. He wanted to scream, to run, yet, at the same time, he wanted to stay right there forever. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, trembling. "I'll stay." It was not a promise of what would come. It was not a rejection either. It was an acceptance of the moment, of the closeness they could no longer deny. The lamp flickered gently. The clock ticked on. Outside, the world was quiet. Inside, a line had been crossed, even if only in words. The shocking request had been made. And now, everything between them had changed. The lingering touch the night after his father's request. The son couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint creak of the old house. The words kept echoing in his mind. Not just as my son. But more. He had agreed to stay. But what did that mean? Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his father's face, lonely raw, and strangely tender. The next morning, the house felt different. The silence was no longer heavy with grief. It was alive with tension, like air before a storm. They avoided the subject, but every glance, every pause, every touch seemed to carry hidden meaning. At breakfast, their hands brushed when they reached for the same spoon. Neither pulled away immediately. The son felt the warmth of his father's skin linger against his own, the touch sparking through him like a quiet fire. His chest tightened, but he didn't speak. His father's eyes flicked to him, filled with something unspoken, before he looked back at his plate. The day unfolded slowly. They worked together in the garden, clearing fallen leaves, trimming branches, repairing the broken fence. The father's hand occasionally touched his son's shoulder when passing tools, steady and firm, but each touch lasted a moment too long. To anyone else, it would look ordinary. To them, it was something more, a silent confession that neither dared to say aloud. Later, in the evening, they found themselves in the living room again. The lamp glowed softly, shadows flickering on the walls. The son sat on the couch, his father beside him, closer than usual. They talked quietly about nothing important, the weather, the garden, small errands that needed to be done, but their words were not what mattered. It was the silence between them, charged with energy, that spoke the loudest. The sun shifted slightly, and their knees brushed. Neither moved. A slow breath left his father's lips, almost like a sigh. The son felt his heartbeat quicken, pounding against his ribs. His father turned his head, studying him. The look was not sharp, not commanding, it was soft, almost pleading, like a man asking for permission without words. The son held the gaze for as long as he could, then looked down at his hands, unable to bear the weight of it. Then came the moment that changed everything. His father reached out slowly, carefully, as though afraid the touch might shatter the fragile space between them. His hand rested gently on the back of his son's hand. It was warm, steady, trembling just enough to reveal his fear. The son froze. Time seemed to stop. The ticking of the clock grew louder. The hum of the lamp seemed brighter, every sound sharper. His breath caught in his throat as his father's thumb moved slightly, brushing his skin in a small, deliberate motion. It was not a father's touch. It was not casual, not careless. It was intimate. The son's heart raced. He wanted to pull away, but his hand stayed where it was. The warmth spread up his arm, filling him with something he didn't understand. It was comforting, yet frightening, safe, yet dangerous. His father spoke in a whisper, his voice heavy with emotion. "I just don't want to feel alone anymore." The son looked up, meeting his father's eyes. In them, he saw grief, longing, and something deeper, something that looked like love but wasn't the kind the world would ever accept. His chest ached. He wanted to say it was wrong, that they should stop, but instead, he whispered, "I'm here." The words hung between them, soft but powerful. His father's hand tightened just slightly, as if afraid to let go. The son felt his throat burn with unspoken words, emotions he couldn't name. He knew this was not where a father and son should be, yet he also knew he could not break the connection. The touch lingered. It spoke more than their voices ever could. It was a promise, a confession, a wound, and a comfort all at once. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. When his father finally let go, it was slow, reluctant, as though pulling away from something he needed. The son's hand tingled where the warmth had been, his skin alive with memory. Neither spoke of it again that night. His father rose from the couch, clearing his throat, pretending to adjust the books on the shelf. The son sat quietly, staring at his hands, lost in confusion and longing. When he went to bed, he couldn't forget. His skin still carried the echo of the touch. His mind replayed it again and again, each time filling his chest with both guilt and warmth. He whispered into the darkness, words only the night could hear. "I'm here. I'm here." And deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. The silence after lost the house stood still. After the funeral, after the neighbors left with their kind words, after the last flower wilted, silence became the loudest sound inside. The curtains moved gently with the wind, but no voice came from the kitchen. No humming of his mother's favorite song, no laughter that used to echo down the hallway. He sat at the wooden dining table, staring at the empty chair across from him. That chair had always belonged to his mother. She would sit there every morning, drinking tea slowly while sunlight touched her face. Now the chair was nothing but a shadow of memory. His father sat at the head of the table, hands folded, eyes red and heavy, as if carrying 1,000 nights of no sleep. The boy, or rather, the young man, felt the weight pressing on both of them. Every small sound in the house seemed louder. The tick of the clock, the creak of the stairs, the clink of cups. Life went on, but it felt hollow. He wondered if his father felt the same, the strange emptiness of losing the person who once made the house feel alive at first. He tried to fill the silence with small words. "Do you want more tea, Dad?" he asked one morning. His father only nodded. "Should I make dinner tonight?" Again, a nod. Words had become too heavy for the old man. They sat together, yet apart, both drowning in their grief, but unable to pull the other out. Evenings were the hardest. The house grew colder when the sun went down. His father would sit in the living room with the lamp switched on, but the light seemed weak against the shadows on the walls. Sometimes he would close his eyes and lean back, breathing slowly, as though listening for a voice that would never return. The son sat nearby, pretending to read, though the words blurred before his eyes. He wanted to say something, anything, to bring comfort, but every sentence felt wrong, too small. too powerless. Yet grief has its own language. It speaks not with words, but with shared silence. Slowly, he began to notice small things. The way his father's hand lingered on his mother's old scarf. The way he turned toward the empty chair as if expecting her to be there. The way he smiled faintly when his son carried the same coffee mug his mother had once favored. These small acts were their way of remembering her together. One morning, sunlight slipped through the curtains and landed across the table. The son poured tea for both of them. As the steam rose, he caught his father's eyes. For the first time in weeks, there was a softness there. A silent thank you. It wasn't a smile, not exactly. But it was a beginning. The young man realized then that grief could bring to people closer in unexpected ways. They began to share little things, folding laundry together, watering the plants, cooking meals side by side. Each task was simple, but it felt important, like stitching broken fabric. Still, under the surface, something unspoken lingered. His father's eyes often rested on him longer than before, as though searching for something beyond comfort. Sometimes, when they brushed hands while passing a plate or closing a drawer, the touch lasted a moment too long. Neither spoke of it, yet both felt it. It was not something they could name, not yet. But it sat in the silence with them. At night, lying in his room, the young man thought about those looks, those touches. He told himself it was just grief. His father was lonely, lost, broken. He himself was trying to be strong, trying to be enough for the both of them. But still, in the quiet of the dark, he felt something stir inside him, something confusing, forbidden, but warm in a way he could not push away. The silence after loss was not empty anymore. It was full of emotions they didn't understand, of boundaries blurred by grief, of comfort that sometimes felt too close. And though neither of them said a word, both knew the house would never be the same again. Familiar comfort. The days passed slowly, but the silence inside the house began to soften. It no longer felt like an empty hall where only echoes lived. It felt more like a waiting room where something unsaid was sitting between them. The son noticed small changes first. His father, who once avoided the kitchen completely, began to join him while he cooked. He would lean against the counter, watching quietly, sometimes passing a spoon or cutting board. They didn't need to speak much, just being near each other was enough. The clatter of dishes, the bubbling sound of a boiling pot, the chopping of vegetables, these sounds filled the house with a strange comfort. One rainy afternoon, they sat together at the table, the window fogged with mist, the steady rhythm of raindrops tapping on glass like a slow heartbeat. The son poured tea into 2 cups. Steam rose between them, carrying warmth across the table. His father wrapped his hands around the cup, holding it as if it were something precious. They spoke not of grief, but of small things. The weather, the broken latch on the garden gate, the neighbor's dog that barked too much. Simple talk, but it felt heavier than silence, like steps slowly taken across a fragile bridge. Now and then their eyes met. When it happened, the son felt a quiet spark, as if their souls were speaking louder than their voices. His father would look at him for just a moment too long, then glance away quickly. The son would smile nervously and take another sip of tea, pretending not to notice. At night, the house held a new rhythm. The father no longer stayed alone in the living room. Instead, they often sat together on the couch, the dim lamp casting golden light. The son read aloud from his mother's favorite book, and his father listened with closed eyes, nodding gently. The words of the story were not important. The sound of his son's voice seemed to be what mattered. One evening, his father let out a small laugh, a laugh the son had not heard in weeks. It came when the son stumbled over a word and teased himself. The sound was soft, fragile, but real. It warmed the young man's chest, almost like sunlight breaking through clouds. He wanted to hold on to it, to keep it alive. From then on, their conversations grew a little more open. His father began to share memories of his mother, how she used to dance in the kitchen when no one was looking, how she scolded him for leaving muddy shoes by the door. The son listened closely, sometimes laughing, sometimes with eyes heavy with tears. These stories were not just about her, they were about the love that had once filled the house. But sometimes, in the middle of those stories, his father's voice grew quiet. His eyes would drift to his son, searching, lingering. The son felt it each time, a weight pressing on him, a warmth curling around his chest. It was not the look of a father missing his wife, it was something deeper, stranger, harder to understand. One night, after sharing a long silence, the father reached across the table and placed his hand on his son's wrist. The touch was gentle, almost accidental, but it stayed there longer than it should have. The son froze, his heart racing, yet he did not pull away. Instead, he looked at his father, and their eyes locked. No words were spoken, but the moment said everything. It was comfort, yes, but it was also longing. It was grief, reaching for warmth, but it was also something more, something neither of them could name. When the moment ended, his father pulled his hand back, clearing his throat, pretending to adjust his chair. The son pretended to check his cup, though his hand shook slightly. The silence after was heavy, but it was not the same kind of silence as before. It was charged, alive, almost dangerous. Later, lying in bed, the son replayed that moment again and again. The warmth of the hand on his skin, the look in his father's eyes, the way time seemed to pause. He told himself it was nothing, just loneliness, just grief, just comfort. But in his heart, he knew it was more. The next day, they acted as if nothing had happened. Breakfast was normal. The garden work was normal. But their eyes betrayed them, carrying an unspoken memory of the night before. Familiar comfort had grown into something unfamiliar. Something they could not explain, yet could not stop. The house, once cold and quiet, now carried a strange new warmth, soft, intimate, and dangerously close to love.